It was one of those quiet afternoons when life in a small Massachusetts town felt perfectly ordinary. Kids played outside, neighbors chatted over fences, and nothing seemed out of place. But in the stillness of that day, a single phone call would shatter the illusion of peace forever. Welcome to the Crime Journal, where we dive into the darkest corners of real-life mysteries and the secrets that hide behind closed doors. If you're drawn to true stories that challenge the limits of human nature, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because today's case will stay with you long after it ends. The story begins in Blackstone, Massachusetts, a small, unassuming town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. One afternoon, a woman named Betsy Brown received a call that made her heart race. On the other end of the line was her 10-year-old son, who had gone to play at his friend's house. His voice trembled as he said, "Mom, there's a baby crying here. I don't know what to do." Confused, Betsy froze for a moment. She knew the family who lived there, the Murrays, and she was sure they didn't have a baby. Without a second thought, she ran to the house to find out what was happening. As soon as she opened the front door, an unbearable stench hit her like a wave. The air was thick with decay. Trash covered the floors, flies buzzed everywhere, and the walls were smeared with grime. Betsy could hardly breathe as she stepped inside, calling out for anyone who might answer. Following the faint sound of crying, she made her way down a dark hallway into a small, filthy room. There, in two separate cribs, she saw something that made her knees go weak to small girls. One, a toddler, and the other an infant, both covered in filth, their tiny faces wet with tears. Betsy couldn't believe what she was seeing. She knew Erica Murray, the children's mother. She knew Erica's two older kids, a teenage daughter and a young boy, but she had never seen these little girls before. No one in the neighborhood even knew they existed. As the realization sank in, Betsy grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Her voice shaking as she described the horrifying scene. She told the operator about the smell, the garbage, the filth, the crying children, and the sight of baby bottles crawling with maggots. Within minutes, police cars and ambulances arrived. Officers stepped inside and immediately recoiled at the stench. The home was like nothing they had ever encountered, a maze of rotting waste, broken furniture, and signs of years of neglect. The two children were quickly taken out and rushed to the hospital for treatment. For the first responders, it was hard to imagine that anyone could have survived in such conditions. But what they didn't yet know was that this was only the beginning. Hidden deeper inside the house, behind doors that hadn't been opened in years, were secrets even more horrifying than the filth that covered every surface. Before the truth came to light, people had known Erica Murray as a quiet woman who mostly kept to herself. Born in 1983, she grew up in a loving family in southern Massachusetts. Her parents were hardworking, kind people, well-liked in their community. As a child, Erica had been cheerful and polite, the kind of girl who was always smiling and eager to help. She did well in school, dressed neatly, and seemed to have her life planned out. But somewhere along the way, that image of a bright, responsible young woman began to fade. By her late teens, Erica's world had changed. She had started dating Raymond Rivera, a man several years older than her, and the two quickly became inseparable. At first, their relationship seemed loving, but over time, it grew controlling and complicated. When Erica became pregnant at 18, she was terrified, embarrassed to face her family and classmates. Still, with the support of those around her, she graduated high school and gave birth to her first child, a baby girl named Kayla Dot. At first, life seemed normal. Erica and Raymond lived with her parents for a while, then eventually moved into Raymond's sister's house in Blackstone. A second child soon followed, a boy named Nicholas. Neighbors saw them as a young family starting out, and nothing seemed unusual. Erica even shared cheerful posts online, showing pictures of birthday parties, home-cooked meals, and her kids smiling for the camera. But as the years went on, something began to change behind closed doors. The once well-kept home slowly fell into disarray. Erica stopped inviting people over. She wore oversized clothes, avoided public places, and became increasingly withdrawn. Friends assumed she was struggling with stress or embarrassment over the state of her home. No one suspected that her isolation hid something much darker. Behind the smiling social media posts and quiet suburban life was a growing secret, one that would eventually turn her home into a house of horrors and shock an entire community. In the years before tragedy struck, Erica Murray's life seemed painfully ordinary. Born and raised in a small town in southern Massachusetts, she was the third child of Kevin and Sharon Murray, a cheerful, middle-class couple known for their kindness and hospitality. Her father worked as a mechanic, and her mother was a homemaker who loved crafts and spent her days organizing community events. The family was close, and their house was often filled with laughter and friends. To those who knew them, the Murrays were the picture of small-town happiness, the kind of family that never made headlines. As a child, Erica was bright and friendly. Teachers described her as a sweet girl who always tried her best. She loved art, music, and spending time outdoors with her siblings. But she was also shy, often keeping her feelings to herself. Those who knew her during her teenage years recalled that she cared deeply about how others saw her. Her hair and nails were always perfect, her clothes neatly pressed. She wasn't popular, but she was well-liked, the kind of student who smiled politely and avoided trouble. When Erica reached high school, she began to crave independence. She started working part-time at a fast food restaurant where she met Raymond Rivera, a man 7 years older than her. Raymond was charming in a quiet way, confident, funny, and attentive. Their friendship turned romantic, and soon they were inseparable. At first, her parents were wary of the age gap, but Erica seemed happy, and they didn't want to interfere. What they couldn't see was how quickly Raymond's protective nature would become possessive. By the time Erica turned 18, her life took a sudden turn. She found out she was pregnant, a revelation that filled her with both joy and fear. She was still in school, unsure of her future, and terrified of disappointing her parents. Yet, despite her fears, she carried the pregnancy to term. Shortly after graduating high school, she gave birth to a baby girl, Kayla. In the summer of 2001, for a brief moment, it looked like everything might turn out all right. Erica moved back into her parents' home with Raymond, and together they tried to build a life for their new family. 2 years later, Erica was pregnant again. The small family had outgrown her parents' house, so they moved in with Raymond's sister Christine in the nearby town of Blackstone. There, Erica gave birth to a second child, a boy named Nicholas. From the outside, their life appeared stable. Erica shared pictures of her smiling children online, attended family events, and seemed to be the same cheerful young woman everyone remembered. But inside the home, things weren't as perfect as they looked. As time went on, the relationship between Erica and Raymond became strained. He worked long hours and spent most of his free time in the basement, where he secretly grew marijuana. Meanwhile, Erica handled the children and the household alone. She grew more isolated, often avoiding contact with friends and family. Her once neat appearance faded, her hair unkempt, her clothes baggy and worn. When people noticed her withdrawal, they assumed she was overwhelmed or embarrassed about her messy home. No one suspected how deep her isolation ran by the late 2000s. The couple's house had fallen into disarray. Mountains of laundry, piles of garbage, and broken furniture filled the rooms. The smell of decay seeped through the walls. Yet somehow, the older children continued attending school, looking healthy and well-behaved. Their outward normalcy kept everyone fooled. Behind that facade, however, Erica was slipping further into secrecy. She began keeping certain rooms closed off. Visitors were never allowed past the front door. When her parents or siblings stopped by, she'd make excuses. The kids were sick, the house was messy, Raymond was sleeping. Gradually, even her family stopped visiting. Then, without anyone realizing it, Erica became pregnant again, and again. Each time, she managed to conceal her pregnancies beneath oversized clothing. No one noticed, not even Raymond. When the babies were born, she delivered them quietly, alone, often while the rest of the family slept. The horror of what she did next would remain hidden for years. It's difficult to understand how someone could live such a double life, one that seemed normal from the outside but concealed unimaginable neglect inside. For years, Erica managed to fool everyone around her. Neighbors thought she was a shy stay-at-home mom. Her family believed she was struggling, but fine. Even social workers, who once visited the home years earlier, failed to see the full picture. As her secret life deepened, her mental state deteriorated. She became withdrawn, almost robotic in her daily routines. She barely left the house, stopped answering calls, and avoided her friends completely. Her children, the ones people knew about, continued to go to school, but the rest of their world fell apart. Inside that home, time seemed to stop. The curtains stayed closed, the air grew heavy, and the house began to rot, a physical reflection of the decay within. Erica's mind, what no one knew, was that the clutter and filth were only surface-level symptoms of something much darker. Beneath that mountain of garbage, hidden behind sealed doors, were reminders of the lives that had begun and ended there, tiny victims who had never been seen, never been named, and never been mourned. When police entered the Murray home that August day, they had no idea what they were about to uncover. At first, their focus was on rescuing the two little girls found in the cribs, one a toddler, the other an infant, both in desperate need of medical attention. Paramedics rushed them outside while officers tried to make sense of the chaos inside. The house was more than just dirty, it was suffocating. Layers of garbage covered the floors. Insects crawled across discarded diapers, and the air was thick with decay. Officers had to wear protective masks just to breathe as they made their way deeper into the house. They realized it wasn't just neglect they were dealing with, it was something far worse. Every step revealed new horrors. There were piles of soiled clothes, moldy food containers, and trash stacked so high that some rooms were almost impossible to enter. The smell of death lingered, faint but unmistakable. One officer later described the scene as something out of a nightmare. In one of the upstairs rooms, they found Erica's teenage daughter and son. Both children were frightened and confused, but physically unharmed. They seemed strangely calm, as if the filth and chaos were normal to them. When officers asked where their mother was, they pointed toward the bedroom at the end of the hallway. There, police found Erica Murray, quiet, expressionless, and sitting on a filthy mattress as if nothing unusual was happening around her. She barely reacted when officers entered the room. At first, Erica seemed cooperative. She spoke softly, saying she didn't understand why the police were there. When asked about the two small children, she insisted they weren't hers, that she was only babysitting them for a friend. But her story didn't make sense. The officers could tell she was lying. When they pressed further, Erica grew defensive, insisting that she hadn't done anything wrong. Her calmness was eerie, almost detached, as if she didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. As the search continued, investigators made a decision to bring in a specialized hazmat team to safely explore the house. What they found next would shock even the most seasoned officers. In a small, cluttered bedroom on the second floor, inside a closet filled with trash and old baby clothes, they found what appeared to be the remains of a baby. Then, in another closet nearby, they discovered more. In total, the bodies of 3 deceased infants were recovered from inside the home. The scene was heartbreaking. The tiny remains were found wrapped in old towels, hidden among piles of clothing and debris. It was as if the house itself had swallowed them whole, keeping their existence secret for years. The discovery turned the investigation from a case of child neglect into a full-blown homicide inquiry. The officers who were there that day later described it as one of the most disturbing scenes of their careers. News of the discovery spread quickly through Blackstone. Within hours, the quiet neighborhood was swarmed with reporters, flashing cameras, and curious onlookers trying to catch a glimpse of the house. Residents who had lived there for years were stunned. Most of them had no idea what had been happening inside that home. They remembered Erica as quiet and polite, always keeping to herself. Some said they hadn't seen her outside in months. Others mentioned strange smells coming from the house but assumed it was just a plumbing issue. No one imagined that something so horrific was unfolding right next door. The following day, police returned with a full forensic team. Every inch of the home was photographed, cataloged, and tested for evidence. Investigators wore hazmat suits, carefully sifting through the filth. It took days to fully search the house because of the overwhelming amount of garbage and debris. They found baby bottles, tiny clothes, and children's toys buried beneath trash. Each item hinted at lives that had begun in secret and ended far too soon. Meanwhile, Erica Murray was taken into custody for questioning. Detectives tried to understand how and why this had happened. At first, she offered little explanation. She sat quietly in the interrogation room, avoiding eye contact. When she did speak, her answers were confusing, fragmented, and filled with contradictions. She admitted to having given birth inside the house, but claimed she had done it alone, without telling anyone, not even Raymond, her longtime partner. She said the babies were stillborn, that she didn't know what to do, and so she hid them. Her story seemed impossible. How could she have carried multiple pregnancies to term without anyone noticing? How could she have lived in that house, surrounded by such horror for years? Investigators struggled to comprehend the depth of her deception. They began piecing together a timeline, comparing her statements with what neighbors and family members remembered. Slowly, a chilling picture began to form, one of a woman who had lived a double life, hiding not just her own pain, but the very existence of her children. Forensic experts worked carefully to identify the remains. They confirmed that 2 of the babies were full-term, while the third appeared to have been a newborn. The medical examiner couldn't determine whether the babies had been born, alive or stillborn, because of the advanced state of decomposition. That uncertainty would become a central issue in the legal case that followed as word of the discovery spread across the country. The media began calling the House of Horrors. Reporters camped outside the quiet neighborhood for days, broadcasting images of the decaying home where unthinkable secrets had been hidden in plain sight. What no one could yet answer was the question that haunted everyone. Why? The investigation into the Blackstone house consumed the small Massachusetts town for months. The sheer horror of what had been found there was impossible to comprehend, and investigators were determined to understand how such a tragedy could have gone unnoticed for so long. Detectives worked day and night, combing through years of records, phone logs, and witness statements to piece together what had really happened behind the closed doors of that decaying home. Erica Murray, now in police custody, maintained a strange calmness that unsettled everyone who met her. During questioning, she spoke in a soft, flat voice, almost detached from reality. She described giving birth alone, in silence, while her family slept. She claimed that the babies were either stillborn or had died shortly after birth. Rather than seeking help, she hid their bodies, wrapping them in towels and placing them in closets. Her explanations were inconsistent, at times contradicting themselves within minutes. It wasn't clear whether she was lying, confused, or mentally unwell. When detectives asked why she hadn't told anyone about the pregnancies, her answer was chillingly simple. "I didn't think anyone would understand." She insisted that she had been ashamed of being pregnant again, ashamed of her home's condition, and terrified of losing her children if anyone discovered the truth. But investigators believed there was more to it than shame. They began to suspect that Erica had deliberately concealed her pregnancies from everyone, even from her partner, Raymond Rivera. Raymond's role in the case became one of the biggest questions investigators faced. He had lived in that house, fathered several of the children, and yet claimed he had no idea that more babies had been born and hidden there. During his interviews, Raymond insisted that he was completely unaware. He said Erica handled everything involving the children and the house. He admitted he rarely went upstairs, claiming he spent most of his time in the basement growing marijuana. To many, his ignorance seemed impossible. How could a man live in a house full of garbage, children, and death without realizing it? Neighbors told police that they sometimes saw Raymond outside mowing the lawn or tinkering with his car, but that Erica rarely came out. They described the house as increasingly run down and said they often noticed a terrible smell coming from the property. When they asked Raymond about it, he always had an excuse: plumbing issues, garbage collection delays, or even a dead animal under the house. No one pressed further. It was easier to believe the simple explanations than to imagine what was really going on inside. As the investigation deepened, prosecutors faced a challenge. To charge Erica with murder, they needed proof that the babies had been born alive. But the medical examiner couldn't determine that due to the condition of the remains. Without that evidence, the case would hinge on neglect and concealment rather than homicide. Still, prosecutors believed Erica's actions were far beyond neglect. They were evidence of a deeply disturbed mind. To understand her mental state, Erica was ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation. The results painted a complicated picture. Psychiatrists found that she suffered from severe depression, social anxiety, and possible psychosis. She appeared to live in a state of emotional paralysis, trapped between guilt, shame, and denial. Her house had become both her prison and her hiding place. Some experts believed she had developed a form of delusional denial, convincing herself that the hidden babies didn't exist, that they were simply gone. During her evaluation, Erica spoke about her fear of losing her children if anyone discovered the state of her home. She said she loved them deeply and wanted to protect them, even as her behavior endangered them. In her mind, The best way to keep her family together was to keep her secrets buried. Literally, when asked why she hadn't sought medical help for the pregnancies, she claimed she was afraid of being judged. "I thought if I ignored it," she said, "it would go away." Raymond, meanwhile, was portrayed as a man who had chosen ignorance over responsibility. While he faced charges for the illegal marijuana plants found in the basement, prosecutors struggled to prove he had any direct role in the children's suffering. Still, many in the community found it hard to believe he hadn't noticed what was happening in his own home. Some speculated that he had turned a blind eye to avoid confronting a reality too disturbing to face. Others believed he genuinely had no idea that Erica had become so secretive and detached that she had completely isolated herself from him and the world. As months passed, the story continued to dominate headlines. The media painted Erica as a monster mother, a woman who had hidden her babies and left her home to rot. But those who had known her once, teachers, childhood friends, and relatives, struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, polite girl they remembered with the woman now sitting in a jail cell. Her parents were devastated. They spoke publicly for the first time, describing their heartbreak and confusion, saying they had no idea what their daughter had become. Behind the public outrage, though, a quieter debate was unfolding, one that questioned how society had failed to see the warning signs. How could multiple pregnancies go unnoticed? How could social services miss a home in such squalor? And how could a woman be so consumed by her own mental illness that she lived surrounded by death without anyone stepping in? The case of Erica Murray had become more than a crime story. It was a mirror reflecting the dark intersections of neglect, secrecy, and mental illness. It forced people to question how much they really know about the families living next door, and how far someone could go to keep up the illusion of normalcy while their world collapsed. Around them, the trial of Erica Murray became one of the most haunting and emotionally charged cases Massachusetts had ever seen. By the time it reached court in 2019, the story had spread far beyond Blackstone. Everyone had heard of the woman who lived in filth, the house of horrors, and the babies hidden in closets. Yet, when the courtroom doors opened, the truth turned out to be far more complex than the public outrage had imagined. Prosecutors painted a disturbing picture of deliberate neglect and deception. They argued that Erica had hidden her pregnancies on purpose, avoided medical care, and let her newborns die without seeking help. To them, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a pattern of choices. They described her as cold, detached, and manipulative. Someone who had grown used to lying so deeply that she could live among death without remorse. This was not an accident, the prosecution insisted. This was years of concealment, years of silence, years of choices that ended in death. The defense told a different story, one of a broken woman crushed by mental illness. They didn't deny that what happened was horrific, but they argued that Erica was not a murderer. They said she was trapped in a cycle of shame, fear, and depression, so severe that she couldn't think or act rationally. Her attorney described her as a ghost in her own life, someone who had mentally shut down long before the crimes were discovered. They claimed that her mind was not capable of distinguishing right from wrong in those moments, that her neglect came from illness, not evil. Raymond Rivera also appeared in court, though his role was limited. He faced lesser charges, mainly related to the marijuana plants and child endangerment. Throughout the trial, he insisted that he had no idea what Erica had been doing upstairs, saying, "I didn't go in those rooms. I didn't know." His words angered many in the courtroom, especially neighbors who believed he should have known. Still, there was no hard evidence that he participated in or even knew about the deaths. He eventually pleaded guilty to lesser charges and received probation. While the focus remained entirely on Erica, the most emotional moments came when investigators, paramedics, and neighbors testified. Several broke down, describing the conditions of the house. One officer said, "It's something you can't unsee. The smell, the silence, the sadness of that place, it never leaves you." Medical examiners testified that the remains of 3 infants were found, but they couldn't determine whether the babies had been born alive. That uncertainty became the central issue of the trial. Without proof that the babies had lived even for a moment, a murder conviction would be impossible. When Erica took the stand, her testimony stunned everyone. She spoke softly, often pausing for long stretches, her voice barely above a whisper. She admitted that she had given birth alone, terrified and ashamed. She said she couldn't explain why she didn't call for help. "I thought it would ruin everything," she murmured. "I didn't know what else to do." Her words left the courtroom divided. Some saw her as cold and emotionless, others as deeply broken. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for several days. When they returned, the verdict shocked the courtroom. Erica Murray was acquitted of murder, as the prosecution had failed to prove that the infants were born alive. However, she was convicted on several counts of assault and battery on a child neglect, and animal cruelty. The judge sentenced her to serve time in a mental health facility rather than a traditional prison, citing her fragile psychological state and her need for treatment. The decision split the community. Many people felt justice hadn't been served, believing she deserved life behind bars. Others saw her as a symbol of untreated mental illness, a woman who had lost control of her mind long before she lost her family. Reporters stood outside the courthouse, asking whether she was a victim or a villain, a monster or a mother destroyed by her own silence. In the aftermath, Blackstone struggled to move on. The house where the horror had been uncovered was eventually demolished, leaving behind an empty lot and a haunting memory. For months, locals avoided walking past it. Parents who once let their children play freely in the neighborhood now kept them close, as if the tragedy had cast a permanent shadow over the street. The case left behind questions that could never be fully answered. How could so many lives go unnoticed? How could a woman live surrounded by death for years without anyone intervening? And perhaps the hardest question of all, was Erica Murray a criminal? Or was she the final casualty of her own crumbling mind? In the years since the case closed, the story of Erica Murray has lingered like a ghost over Blackstone. The house where it all happened is gone. But the memory remains a reminder of how isolation and silence can hide unimaginable suffering. Neighbors still struggle to understand how they missed the signs, how a family could live among them for so long with secrets so dark. For many, the case became more than a story of crime. It was a wake-up call. It forced people to look closer at mental illness, neglect, and the ways shame can destroy lives. Experts have since used the case in discussions about the failures of social services and the stigma that keeps people from asking for help. In the end, Erica wasn't the only one who lived in denial. The whole community had turned away, not wanting to see what was right in front of them. Today, the surviving children are living with relatives far from the spotlight. Their lives, once trapped in chaos, have slowly moved toward normalcy, though the scars will never fully fade. Erica herself remains under psychiatric care, reportedly quiet and withdrawn, spending her days in treatment rather than behind bars. She will likely never return to the life she once knew. For those who followed the case, the Blackstone tragedy remains one of the most disturbing examples of hidden horror. Proof that evil doesn't always come from monsters in the dark, but sometimes from people too broken to face the truth. If this story shook you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Crime Journal. We uncover the cases that the world tried to forget, where every secret has a voice, and every truth demands to be heard. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, even the quietest homes can hold the loudest screams.